My dad got out of prison. After 10 years for a crime he didn't commit, my 10-year-old sister Elena called him sir because she didn't remember him, and it broke him. Then he started making her sleep in a toddler bed and wear baby clothes to make up for lost time. But the real horror began when he kidnapped her and left a note on our kitchen table. I was 16 when my dad finally came home from prison after being framed for second-degree murder. I hadn't seen him since I was a child, and my 10-year-old sister Elena didn't even recognize him. On the other hand, my mom was practically beaming. "My love!" she exclaimed as soon as he walked in the door. I just waved, and Elena whispered, "Hello, sir," in a voice so shaky it broke my heart. "You used to call me daddy," he replied, tearing up. He didn't even acknowledge me. The next morning, I found him sitting at the kitchen table staring at Elena's elementary graduation photo. His shoulders were shaking, and when he looked up at me, his eyes were red. "One day late," he kept saying. "They let me out one day late because of paperwork, and I missed it." Mom tried to comfort him, but he just kept repeating how he'd promised to be there. After a few weeks, he seemed to be settling in, though. Or as settled as you can be after spending over 10 years in prison, lol. He made it his mission to make up for lost time. He volunteered for every single field trip and signed up to be room parent for Elena's 5th grade class. He'd pick her up from school every day with some new toy or treat. Mom thought it was sweet how dedicated he was. I felt a little jealous that Elena was getting the father I never had, but I figured it was better one of us got him than neither. But then things started feeling a little off. He quit his job at the warehouse because he said it interfered with Elena's schedule. When she wanted to go to her best friend's birthday party, he made up some excuse about needing family time. By October, he was sitting outside her classroom during tests. The teacher, Mrs. O'Brien, pulled me aside one day and asked if everything was okay at home. Apparently, Dad had been showing up during Elena's lunch period and making her eat with him in the car. The other kids had started teasing her about it. Elena begged me not to make a big deal out of it, so I didn't. But things got worse after Thanksgiving. He threw out all of Elena's clothes and replaced them with little kid stuff, sparkly unicorn shirts and Velcro shoes, even though she'd been tying her own laces for years. When Elena complained, he said those other clothes were too grown up for his baby. He made her wear her hair in pigtails every day, just like in her old school photos. Well, there's no one I love more in this world than Elena, so when she fell asleep, I confronted him. "Frank, my dad's name. What are you doing? This is what fathers do." "I need to make up for lost time," he interrupted. I wanted to keep pressing, but that's when tears started streaming down his face. "My own baby called me sir. I have 2 years before middle school ends. That's all I get. Please don't take that from me too." His voice dripped like honey, but I should have known it was laced with venom. I just nodded and decided to trust him. Big mistake. I was packing Elena's lunch for school the next day when I heard weird lullaby music coming from her room. I went to check on her and my stomach dropped. Elena was cramped into a toddler bed Dad had bought, her legs hanging off the end. She was sucking on a sippy cup while he read Goodnight Moon in this creepy baby voice. My hands were shaking when I pulled him into the hallway. "What the hell are you doing to her?" He just smiled like nothing was wrong. "This is how she needs to sleep, like when she was little." But seeing my 10-year-old sister forced into a bed meant for a 3-year-old made me want to throw up. But I knew if it was me against him I'd lose, so I recruited for backup. And a few days later, we had a family intervention. My Uncle Carlos organized it at my grandmother's house. The whole family showed up. I didn't expect them to press him as hard as they did, but TBH, I was glad. Uncle Carlos used to be a cop and he was the harshest. Told him he'd call his parole officer if this behavior didn't stop immediately. My Aunt Maria was screaming about how he was destroying Elena. Dad completely lost it. He fell to his knees clutching Elena's baby photos he'd brought with him. "You don't understand. I already lost 9 years. 9 years of bedtime stories, birthday parties, teaching her to ride a bike. I didn't even have time to breathe before he started ripping Elena's big girl clothes off. These aren't for babies." She was screaming and hitting him as he tried to put a Dora shirt on her. Carlos and 2 other uncles managed to pull Dad off Elena while she ran sobbing into my arms. Grandma called 911, but Dad grabbed his car keys and bolted before they arrived. The cops said they couldn't do much since he hadn't technically committed a crime yet, just a family dispute. Mom was in complete denial. She kept saying he was just overwhelmed and needed time to adjust. She refused to change the locks or get a restraining order. Elena started sleeping in my room with a chair wedged against the door. For 3 days, everything was quiet. Dad didn't come home, didn't call. Mom said he was probably staying at a motel to cool down. I wanted to believe her, but something felt wrong. Really wrong. Then Thursday came. I came home from school to an empty house. Elena's stuffed animals were arranged in a line like they were marching out the door. The security footage from our doorbell camera showed Dad carrying Elena to his van. She was completely limp. On the kitchen table was a note in his shaky handwriting, "Making up for lost time." My hands shook as I read the note again. "Making up for lost time." The words blurred through my tears. I grabbed my phone and called 911, then Mom, then Uncle Carlos. The dispatcher took the information calmly while I paced the kitchen, my voice cracking as I described Elena's pink backpack and the clothes she'd been wearing. Mom arrived home 20 minutes later, her face pale. She kept insisting there had to be an explanation, that Frank wouldn't hurt Elena. I showed her the security footage again. Elena's body was completely limp in his arms. Mom's hands flew to her mouth. Uncle Carlos burst through the door with 2 of my other uncles. He immediately took charge, calling his old contacts at the police department while my aunts started arriving. Within an hour, our living room was packed with family members organizing search parties. The police issued an Amber Alert, but warned us that parental kidnappings were complicated. Since Mom and Dad were still married and there was no custody order, Frank technically had parental rights. They'd do what they could, but we needed to prepare for limited official help. I couldn't just sit there. I grabbed Elena's school directory and started calling every single classmate's family. Maybe someone had seen something. On my 8th call, a mom mentioned seeing Frank's van at the gas station on Highway 42 that afternoon. He'd been buying snacks and coloring books. Uncle Carlos gathered this information and mapped out possible routes. Frank didn't have much money, so he couldn't have gone far. We divided into groups to check motels, campgrounds, and any place he might hide hide with a child. I rode with Uncle Carlos, checking every motel along Highway 42. At each stop, I showed Elena's school photo and described Frank. Most desk clerks shook their heads, but at a rundown place called the Sleepy Bear Inn, the manager's eyes widened. He'd seen them check in that morning, room 12. My heart pounded as Uncle Carlos called for backup from the family. We couldn't wait for police. Within 15 minutes, 6 cars pulled into the motel parking lot. Uncle Carlos knocked on the door of room 12. No answer. The manager unlocked it for us. The room was empty, but Elena's pink backpack sat on the bed. Her stuffed rabbit was on the pillow. Fresh coloring pages covered the small table, all featuring baby themes. Diapers and baby food jars lined the dresser. My stomach churned. A receipt on the nightstand showed a purchase from a nearby Walmart just 2 hours ago. We raced there, spreading out through the store. I found them in the toy aisle. Elena was sitting in a shopping cart meant for toddlers, her legs cramped and uncomfortable. Frank was showing her baby toys, speaking in that same creepy voice. Elena saw me first. Her eyes went wide with relief and fear. I motioned for her to stay calm while texting Uncle Carlos our location, but Frank must have sensed something because he suddenly turned around. His face went from surprise to rage to something desperate and wild. He grabbed the cart handle tighter. I stepped forward slowly, keeping my voice steady. I told him we just wanted Elena safe, that we could work this out. Frank's eyes darted around like a trapped animal. He started pushing the cart toward the back exit. I followed, trying to keep him talking. Other shoppers stared as we moved through the store. This strange procession of a grown man pushing a too-big child in a baby cart, while a teenager followed pleading. Uncle Carlos appeared at the end of the aisle with my other uncles. Frank was surrounded. He looked at Elena, then at us, his face crumbling. He fell to his knees beside the cart, sobbing about lost time and broken promises. Elena climbed out of the cart and ran to me. I held her tight while Uncle Carlos and the others kept Frank contained until security arrived. The police came next, and this time they had to act. Frank was violating his parole by taking Elena without permission. Back home, Mom finally broke down. Seeing Frank arrested, seeing Elena's terror, shattered her denial. She agreed to file for divorce and get a restraining order. The locks were changed that night. Elena stayed in my room for the next week. We pushed my bed against the wall and made a fort with blankets where she felt safe. She'd wake up crying, dreaming about being forced back into baby clothes. I'd hold her and remind her she was safe, that she was a big kid, that no one would make her be a baby again. The divorce proceedings moved quickly. I wonder what's really going through Frank's mind when he keeps saying making up for lost time. There's something deeper here than just missing his daughter's childhood. The way he completely ignores his older child while obsessing over Elena feels strange. Frank's parole was revoked for the kidnapping. He'd serve the rest of his original sentence plus new charges. Mom struggled with guilt, but our family rallied around us. Uncle Carlos checked on us daily. Grandma brought meals. My aunts took turns staying over. Elena slowly returned to normal. She burned the baby clothes Frank had bought in a small ceremony in our backyard, watching the smoke rise with a serious expression. She started sleeping in her own room again, though she kept a photo of us together on her nightstand. 3 months later, at Elena's spring concert, she sang a solo. Her voice was clear and strong, nothing like the shaky whisper from when Frank first arrived. Mom and I sat in the front row, and when Elena's eyes found us, she smiled. A real smile. The kind that told me my little sister was going to be okay. I thought that would be the end of it. Frank was back in prison, Elena was healing, and our family could finally move forward. But I underestimated how deep his obsession ran. The first sign came through Mom's phone. She'd been getting texts from an unknown number, always during Elena's school hours. Mom would read them, and her face would go pale, but she'd quickly delete them and pretend nothing happened. When I confronted her about it, she brushed me off and changed the subject. Then Elena's teacher called. Someone had been requesting copies of Elena's school records, claiming to be conducting a custody evaluation. The school secretary had almost released them before realizing no court order existed. The description matched Frank's cellmate who'd been released 2 weeks earlier. Uncle Carlos helped us file reports, but without concrete threats, the police couldn't do much. They increased patrols near our house and Elena's school, but that was all. We installed new security cameras and changed our routines, picking different routes to school each day. Mom started acting strange. She'd leave for grocery shopping and return hours later with nothing. Her phone would ring at odd hours, and she'd take the calls in her car. When I pressed her about it, she'd get defensive and accuse me of not trusting her. One afternoon, I came home early from school with a headache. Mom's car was in the driveway, but the house was empty. I found her in the garage, packing Elena's old baby clothes into boxes. She jumped when she saw me, quickly closing the box and making excuses about spring cleaning. That night, I searched her phone while she slept. The deleted messages were still in her trash folder. Frank had been calling from prison, using other inmates' phone privileges. He'd convinced her that he was getting therapy, that he understood his mistakes, that he just wanted to see pictures of Elena to help him heal. The messages showed Mom had been visiting him. She'd brought photos of Elena at school, at her concert, even sleeping in her bed. My hands trembled as I scrolled through their conversations. Frank was manipulating her, playing on her guilt and their history together. I confronted Mom the next morning after Elena left for school. She broke down crying, admitting everything. Frank had promised he'd changed, that the therapy was working. He just needed to see that Elena was okay, to know she was happy. Mom thought sharing photos would help him let go, but Frank wasn't letting go. He was planning. Through Mom's visits, he'd learned our new routines, Elena's schedule, even which room she'd moved back into. He knew about the security cameras and our different routes to school. He'd been gathering information through Mom's misguided compassion. Uncle Carlos was furious when I told him. He arranged for Mom to stay with Grandma for a while, to break Frank's influence over her. We changed all our routines again, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were playing into Frank's hands somehow. The calls to Mom stopped, but new problems started. Elena's favorite teacher suddenly requested a transfer. Her best friend's parents withdrew their daughter from the school. Other parents started keeping their children away from Elena at recess. Someone was spreading rumors about our family. I discovered Frank had contacts outside prison who were making anonymous calls to school parents. They claimed Elena was disturbed, that our family family was dangerous, that child services were investigating us. The lies were carefully crafted to isolate Elena without technically breaking any laws. Elena started coming home in tears. Kids whispered about her at lunch. Birthday party invitations stopped coming. She begged to switch schools, but we couldn't afford private school, and the district wouldn't approve a transfer without cause. Mom returned home, determined to fix things. She called every parent, explaining the situation, but the damage was done. Some believed her, but others remained suspicious. Elena retreated into herself, spending hours in her room with her stuffed animals. Then Frank's lawyer contacted us. He was filing for a custody evaluation from prison, claiming Mom was an unfit parent who denied him access to his child. The lawyer had statements from other inmates describing Frank as a reformed man, desperate to reconnect with his daughter. The legal filing meant Frank could demand supervised visits. Mom hired a lawyer with money borrowed from Uncle Carlos, but Frank had prison legal aid and plenty of time to build his case. He documented every photo Mom had shared as evidence of her supporting his parental rights. During this chaos, I noticed someone watching our house. A woman in her 30s would park across the street during school hours, pretending to read but clearly observing our home. When I approached her car one day, she drove off quickly. Uncle Carlos ran her license plate through a friend still on the force. She was a social worker who'd lost her license for falsifying reports. Frank had somehow connected with her through prison correspondence programs, promising to help her get reinstated if she helped him. We reported her to the police, but she hadn't technically done anything illegal. Sitting in a public street wasn't a crime. Following someone without making contact wasn't stalking. She knew exactly how far she could push without crossing legal lines. The stress was destroying our family. Mom barely slept, jumping at every sound. Elena had nightmares about Frank taking her away again. I started missing school to walk Elena to and from class, making sure no one approached her. Frank's custody hearing was scheduled for the following month. His lawyer filed motion after motion, each requiring responses that drained our finances. Mom sold her jewelry and took extra shifts at work to pay legal fees. Meanwhile, the harassment escalated. Dead flowers appeared on our doorstep. Elena's bike tires were slashed while it sat in our locked garage. Someone had been inside our home. The police found no signs of forced entry, and nothing was stolen, so they couldn't pursue it. I installed new locks and additional cameras, but the incidents continued. Whoever was doing Frank's bidding knew our schedules, our weaknesses. They were careful to stay just within legal boundaries while making our lives miserable. Elena's grades dropped. She stopped singing, stopped smiling. The confident girl who'd performed her solo was disappearing, replaced by an anxious child who flinched at unexpected sounds. Frank was destroying her without ever leaving his cell. Mom discovered Frank had been corresponding with multiple people outside prison. Through a network of prison pen pals and advocacy groups for incarcerated parents, he'd built a support system of people who believed his story of a loving father denied access to his child. These people, thinking they were helping reunite a family, provided Frank with resources and assistance. Some wrote letters to the judge supporting his custody request. Others donated to a fund for his legal expenses. A few even offered to provide supervised visitation venues. We tried explaining the truth to these people, but Frank had crafted his narrative carefully. He admitted to making mistakes, but painted them as misguided love. He shared selective truths that made him seem sympathetic while portraying us as vindictive. The social worker who'd been watching our house escalated her tactics. She started approaching Elena's classmates' parents, claiming to be conducting an informal investigation. She'd share concerns about Elena's home environment, planting seeds of doubt. When confronted by school administration, she insisted she was just a concerned citizen. Without her license, she couldn't claim any official capacity, which paradoxically made it harder to stop her. She wasn't impersonating a social worker. She was just asking questions. Elena begged to be homeschooled, but Mom couldn't afford to stop working. I offered to drop out and teach her myself, but Mom refused to let me sacrifice my education. We were trapped between bad options. Frank's lawyer filed an emergency motion claiming Elena was being psychologically abused by being denied contact with her father. They cited her declining grades and social isolation as evidence, twisting the very problems Frank had caused into weapons against us. The judge ordered a psychological evaluation for Elena. The court-appointed psychologist was professional but overworked. In their brief session, Elena was too scared to fully explain her fear of Frank. The report noted she seemed anxious about her father but didn't find evidence of abuse. This played into Frank's hands. His lawyer argued that Elena's anxiety was due to parental alienation, that we'd poisoned her against her loving father. They requested immediate supervised visitation to begin repairing the relationship. Mom's lawyer fought back, presenting evidence of Frank's obsessive behavior and manipulation. But Frank had been a model prisoner, attending every therapy session and parenting class available. How does Frank manage to build such a big network of helpers from inside prison? The way he got all those pen pals and parent groups to believe his story shows he really understands how to make people trust him. That's both clever and really scary. On paper, he looked reformed. The judge ordered a trial period of supervised phone calls. Elena would have to speak with Frank for 15 minutes twice a week, with a court supervisor monitoring. Mom tried to appeal, but the order stood. The first call was a disaster. Frank spent the entire time crying about how much he missed his baby girl. Elena sat frozen, unable to speak. The supervisor noted she seemed uncomfortable but didn't witness any direct inappropriate behavior. After each call, Elena would lock herself in the bathroom and cry. She stopped eating properly, pushing food around her plate. Dark circles appeared under her eyes from nightmares. But legally, we had to make her take the calls or face contempt of court. Frank used the calls to gather more information. He'd ask innocent-sounding questions about her day, her friends, her activities. Elena tried to give vague answers, but he was skilled at manipulation. He'd guilt her for not sharing, crying about feeling shut out of her life. The supervised calls gave Frank's supporters more ammunition. They saw a father desperate to connect with a child who'd been turned against him. Some began harassing us directly, sending letters about the importance of father-daughter relationships. I started recording everything, every incident, every every strange car, every hang-up call. I created detailed logs with times, dates, and descriptions. Uncle Carlos helped me organize it into a comprehensive file for Mom's lawyer. But Frank was always one step ahead. He'd studied law in prison, learning exactly what would and wouldn't violate his restrictions. Every action was calculated to cause maximum distress while maintaining plausible deniability. The woman who'd been watching our house filed a complaint with Child Services, claiming she'd witnessed neglect. Even though she had no credibility, the complaint triggered a mandatory investigation. A real social worker had to visit our home and interview Elena. The investigation found no issues, but the process was traumatic. Elena had to answer questions about her home life, her relationship with Mom and me, whether she felt safe. The very system meant to protect her was being weaponized against us. Mom started breaking down. She'd cry randomly during dinner, apologize constantly to Elena, blame herself for ever letting Frank back into their lives. I tried to hold everyone together, but I was only 16. The weight of protecting my family was crushing. Frank's phone calls became more manipulative. He'd tell Elena about other daughters who loved their fathers, about how empty his life was without her. He'd describe the future they could have together once he proved he was better. The supervisor noted Elena's distress, but said Frank wasn't technically violating any rules. He wasn't making threats or inappropriate comments. He was just a sad father sharing his feelings. The emotional manipulation was too subtle for official intervention. We tried switching supervisors, hoping someone else would recognize the manipulation, but the court system was overwhelmed, and supervisors were rotated randomly. Each new person saw only a fragment of the pattern. Elena started having panic attacks before the calls. She'd hyperventilate and shake, begging not to talk to him, but missing calls would violate the court order. Mom had to physically hold her sometimes while I dialed the number. Frank filed another motion, claiming the calls were going well and requesting video calls. His lawyer argued that seeing Elena would help him better connect with her. They presented certificates from every prison program he'd completed as evidence of his rehabilitation. Our lawyer countered with Elena's medical records showing anxiety and weight loss since the calls began, but Frank's team argued this was due to our negative influence, not the calls themselves. They painted us as sabotaging his efforts to reconnect. The judge compromised, ordering one video call per month in addition to the voice calls. Elena would have to see Frank's face, let him see how much she'd grown. The thought made her physically sick. I researched every legal option. Could we move out of state? Not without court permission, which Frank could block. Could we get a restraining order? Not without proof of direct threats or violence. The system that should have protected Elena was failing her. The first video call was scheduled at the courthouse with better supervision. Elena wore the most childish outfit she could find, hoping to bore Frank by appearing unchanged, but seeing her on screen made him cry with joy. He spent the call reminiscing about her baby years, telling stories about feeding her bottles and rocking her to sleep. Elena sat rigid, occasionally nodding when the supervisor prompted her to respond. Frank seemed oblivious to her discomfort, lost in his fantasies. After the call, Elena threw up in the courthouse bathroom. She hadn't eaten that morning, so it was mostly bile. I held her hair back while she sobbed, promising I'd find a way to make it stop. But Frank's behavior during the supervised calls was technically perfect. He followed every rule, never said anything inappropriate, just shared his feelings and memories. The supervisors saw a loving father, not the predator we knew him to be. His supporters increased their pressure. They organized letter-writing campaigns to the judge, started a social media page about fathers' rights, shared Frank's story as an example of parental alienation. Our names weren't public, but Elena lived in fear of being identified. Mom hired a private investigator to look into Frank's prison activities. We needed proof of his manipulation, evidence of the network he'd built. But Frank had been careful, using intermediaries and keeping his direct communications clean. The investigator found connections between Frank and the disgraced social worker, traced money from his supporters to her accounts. But proving Frank had directed her actions was nearly impossible. Prison communications were monitored, and he'd been too smart to leave evidence. Elena's best friend's family moved away suddenly. Her parents admitted they couldn't handle the drama surrounding our family. Elena lost one of her last connections to normal childhood, another casualty of Frank's campaign. I started staying up at night, researching custody law and parental rights. There had to be something we'd missed, some legal avenue to protect Elena. But every path led to the same conclusion. Without proof of direct harm, Frank retained parental rights. Mom considered drastic measures. She researched countries without extradition treaties, calculated how much money we'd need to disappear. But running would make us criminals, and Elena deserved better than a life in hiding. The calls continued, each one chipping away at Elena's spirit. Frank would cry about missing her birthday, describe presents he wanted to buy her, promise wonderful times when he got out. He painted himself as the victim, Elena as his salvation. I noticed patterns in Frank's supporters' activities. They seemed to know when we'd be home, when Elena had school events, when Mom worked late. Someone was feeding them information, but we couldn't figure out who. Then I discovered Mom's phone had been cloned. Every text, every call, every calendar entry was being monitored. The investigator traced it back to the prison's computer lab, where Frank had library privileges. He'd been watching our every move through Mom's digital life. We got new phones with better security, but the damage was done. Frank knew our lawyer's strategy, our financial situation, every detail of our lives. He'd been playing chess while we played checkers, always 3 moves ahead. The custody hearing approached like a storm on the horizon. Frank's lawyer filed motion after motion, each requiring expensive responses. They requested character witnesses, psychological evaluations, home studies. Every requirement drained our resources and energy. Mom worked overtime to pay legal bills, leaving me to care for Elena most evenings. I helped with homework, made dinners, tried to maintain normalcy, but how could anything be normal when her father was orchestrating our destruction from a prison cell? Frank's manipulation reached new levels during calls. He'd mention things only someone watching our house would know, like the new flowers Mom planted or the color of Elena's backpack. The implicit threat was clear. He had eyes everywhere. The supervisor dismissed our concerns, saying Frank was just trying to show interest interest in Elena's life. Many incarcerated parents asked similar questions. Without explicit threats, it was considered normal conversation. I started taking Elena to school through different routes each day, sometimes doubling back or taking unnecessary detours. The disgraced social worker still appeared occasionally, but less predictably. We were living like fugitives in our own town. Frank requested Elena's school records for his legal case. The school had to comply with the court order, giving him access to every report card, every teacher's note, every documented incident. He was building his case with our own information. His lawyer argued that Elena's declining performance proved she needed her father's influence. They twisted every fact to support their narrative. Elena's anxiety became evidence of maternal inadequacy. Her social isolation proved we were controlling. The judge ordered family therapy sessions via video call. A therapist would mediate conversations between Frank and Elena, supposedly to repair their relationship. Elena begged not to go, but refusal would violate the court order. The first therapy session was excruciating. Frank dominated the conversation, talking about his feelings and desires while Elena sat silent. The therapist, following standard reconciliation protocols, encouraged Elena to share her emotions with her father. Frank's crying about missing his baby girl while she sits frozen feels like watching someone play emotional violin with broken strings. The supervisor noting discomfort, but no inappropriate behavior. That's like saying the Titanic had a small ice problem. When Elena finally spoke, she chose her words carefully. She missed the father she'd imagined before he came home, the one who'd respect her age and interests. Frank twisted this into missing him, crying about how he wanted to be that father. After 3 sessions, the therapist recommended continued contact with gradual increase. They saw Frank's emotional responses as genuine desire to connect, not manipulation. Elena's carefully worded objections were interpreted as fear that could be overcome. Our lawyer presented evidence of Frank's prison communications, his network of supporters, the harassment we'd endured, but without direct proof linking Frank to specific incidents. The judge considered them unfortunate coincidences. Frank's parole hearing was scheduled for 6 months away. With good behavior and completed programs, he had a strong chance of early release. The thought of him free, with court-ordered access to Elena, kept me awake at night. Mom finally broke her silence about Frank's past. She revealed incidents from before his imprisonment that she'd never reported. Times when his affection for baby Elena had seemed excessive, when she'd found him in Elena's nursery at odd hours, just watching her sleep. But without documentation, these revelations were dismissed as desperate attempts to deny a father his rights. Frank's lawyer argued Mom was manufacturing memories to support her case. The judge warned her about making unsubstantiated allegations. Elena's 12th birthday approached. Frank fixated on it during calls, lamenting missing her childhood birthdays. He'd already sent presents through his supporters, all age-inappropriate toys that sat unopened in our garage. I planned a small celebration with just family, trying to give Elena normalcy, but Frank's influence poisoned even that. He'd convinced several relatives that we were being cruel, denying him participation in his daughter's life. The birthday came and went with forced smiles and underlying tension. Elena blew out candles on a cake she barely touched, opened presents she didn't want, endured phone calls from relatives urging her to forgive her father. Frank used the birthday as ammunition in court. His lawyer argued we'd deliberately excluded him from a milestone moment. They requested makeup time, additional calls to compensate for missing the celebration. The judge granted it. Elena would have to endure extra contact as punishment for our attempt to give her a peaceful birthday. Every effort to protect her was turned against us in the twisted logic of the legal system. Mom's health started deteriorating. The stress manifested physically as headaches, insomnia, and stomach problems. She missed work for doctor's appointments, adding financial strain to our mounting pressures. I considered dropping out of school to work full-time, help with legal bills, but Mom refused, insisting I graduate. She'd sacrificed too much for me to throw away my future. We argued about it constantly, adding to the family tension. Frank's next move was masterful in its cruelty. He filed a complaint with the prison, claiming we were violating his religious rights by not allowing him to pray with Elena. He'd suddenly discovered faith, joining every religious program available. The prison chaplain supported his request, writing letters about Frank's spiritual transformation. They described a man seeking redemption, wanting to share his newfound faith with his daughter. The narrative was compelling to those who didn't know the truth. A judge ordered religious counseling sessions added to our requirements. Elena would have to attend video calls with Frank and a chaplain discussing spirituality and forgiveness. The sessions were scheduled for Sunday mornings, ruining our one peaceful day. During these sessions, Frank would weep about his sins and beg Elena's forgiveness. The chaplain, well-meaning but naive, encouraged Elena to open her heart to forgiveness. They couldn't see the manipulation beneath Frank's performance. Elena tried explaining her fear during one session. Frank immediately broke down, blaming himself dramatically while subtly suggesting Elena was being unforgiving. The chaplain comforted Frank, inadvertently reinforcing that Elena was hurting her father. I watched my sister disappearing. The bright, confident girl was replaced by a shadow who spoke in whispers and flinched at sudden movements. Frank was erasing her childhood as surely as if he'd locked her in that toddler bed forever. The legal bills were crushing us. Mom sold her car, taking buses to work. We ate rice and beans most nights, saving every penny for lawyer fees. Uncle Carlos helped when he could, but he had his own family to support. Frank knew about our financial struggles through his network. His supporters would sometimes leave envelopes of cash in our mailbox with notes about helping Elena. We couldn't keep the money without looking like we were accepting their narrative. The custody trial date was set. 3 days of hearings that would determine Elena's fate. Frank would appear via video link, presenting his case for increased access. Our lawyer prepared Elena to testify, though the thought terrified her. In preparation, Frank's lawyer deposed everyone in our lives. Teachers, neighbors, relatives, all had to answer questions about our family. Some supported us, but others had been influenced by Frank's campaign of manipulation. The deposition revealed how deeply Frank's network had penetrated our community. People we'd trusted repeated his talking points about parental alienation situation. Former friends testified about mom's protectiveness as if it were pathological. Elena's therapist was called to testify. Despite our hopes, they remained neutral, stating that while Elena showed signs of anxiety, they couldn't determine the cause. Frank's tears during sessions were noted as signs of genuine emotion. I testified about finding Elena in the toddler bed, about the baby clothes and sippy cups, but Frank's lawyer painted me as a jealous sibling, resentful of attention Elena received. They twisted my protectiveness into possessiveness. Mom's testimony was brutal. Frank's lawyer questioned her about every decision, every moment of their marriage. They brought up her visits to Frank in prison, the photos she'd shared, using her compassion against her. Throughout it all, Frank appeared on screen in his prison uniform, looking reformed and remorseful. He'd lost weight, aged considerably, and perfected the image of a broken man seeking redemption. Even I almost believed it sometimes. The judge would decide within 2 weeks. Those 14 days stretched endlessly, each morning bringing fresh dread. Elena barely ate, barely slept, barely spoke. She was shutting down, protecting herself the only way she knew how. While we waited, Frank's harassment continued through his proxies. Anonymous calls to mom's work complained about her performance. Elena's new teacher received concerned letters about her home situation. The pressure never stopped. I turned 17 during this waiting period. There was no celebration, just another day of anxiety and fear. My childhood had ended the day Frank came home from prison. Now I just wanted Elena to keep hers. The decision came on a Tuesday morning. Mom's hands shook as she opened the email from our lawyer. The judge had granted Frank supervised in-person visits. Once a month, Elena would have to spend 2 hours with him at a court-approved facility. Mom collapsed into a chair while I read the rest. Frank's lawyer had successfully argued that video calls weren't enough for meaningful reconnection. Elena ran to the bathroom when I told her. I heard her retching, then water running. She emerged 20 minutes later with red eyes and wet hair. Mom tried to hug her, but Elena pushed past us both to her room. Uncle Carlos arrived within the hour. He read through the entire decision, highlighting key sections. The judge acknowledged Elena's anxiety but attributed it to the separation, not Frank's behavior. They'd bought into the parental alienation narrative completely. Our lawyer called with limited options. We could appeal, but that would take months and likely fail. The visits would begin in 2 weeks regardless. Missing them would put Mom in contempt of court, potentially costing her custody entirely. I spent that night researching the visitation facility. It was 40 miles away, a converted office building with cameras in every room. Supervisors would monitor continuously, but Frank would finally have physical access to Elena again. Elena stopped going to school. She'd get dressed, eat breakfast, then lock herself in the bathroom until the bus passed. Mom had to call in sick from work repeatedly to stay home with her. The truancy notices started piling up. Frank's supporters celebrated online. They posted about justice being served, about a father's love conquering alienation. Someone leaked that the visits involved our family, though they didn't have our names yet. Elena lived in terror of being identified. Mom tried everything to prepare Elena. She bought new clothes for the visits, practiced breathing exercises, promised rewards afterward. But Elena would start shaking whenever Mom mentioned Frank's name. The court order might as well have been a death sentence. I skipped school to attend a meeting with Elena's principal. The truancy was becoming serious. If it continued, the state would investigate, potentially removing Elena from our home. Frank's plan was working perfectly, using the system against us. The principal suggested independent study as a temporary solution. Elena could complete coursework at home while we resolved family issues. It wasn't ideal, but it bought us time. I picked up her assignments twice a week. 3 days before the first visit, Frank's lawyer filed another motion. They wanted the supervisor positioned outside the room, allowing Frank private time with Elena. The timing of Frank's legal motions seems oddly perfect, requesting private time just days before the first visit. His prison religious conversion happening right when he needs character witnesses makes me wonder who's really coaching him through this legal chess game. They argued the constant monitoring prevented genuine bonding. Our lawyer fought it immediately. The emergency hearing was scheduled for the morning of the visit. We'd have to drive to court, argue the motion, then potentially drive Elena straight to see Frank. The cruelty of the timing wasn't accidental. That night, Elena asked me to cut her hair. She wanted it short, nothing like the little girl Frank remembered. I used Mom's sewing scissors in the bathroom, trying to make it even. Hair fell around us like snow while Elena stared at her reflection. Mom cried when she saw Elena's shorn head the next morning, but Elena seemed calmer somehow, like she'd taken some small control back. She ate breakfast for the first time in days, though she couldn't keep it down. The courthouse was packed when we arrived. Frank's supporters filled one side, holding signs about father's rights. Some recognized us from previous hearings, pointing and whispering. Uncle Carlos formed a protective barrier with other family members. Inside the courtroom, Frank appeared on video from prison. He'd grown a beard, making him look older, softer. He gasped when he saw Elena's hair, then started crying about his baby girl changing without him. The judge listened to both arguments. Frank's lawyer painted the supervisor as an intrusion on sacred father-daughter bonding. Our lawyer emphasized Elena's documented anxiety and Frank's history. The tension in the room was suffocating. After an hour of deliberation, the judge compromised. The supervisor would remain in the room but positioned at a distance, able to see but not hear quiet conversation. It was the worst possible outcome, giving Frank exactly what he wanted. We had 2 hours before the visit. Elena threw up twice in the courthouse bathroom while Mom rubbed her back. I wanted to run, take Elena, and disappear, but Uncle Carlos reminded me that would only give Frank ammunition. The drive to the visitation facility felt like a funeral procession. Elena sat between Mom and me in Uncle Carlos's car, gripping both our hands. Her palms were sweaty but ice cold. Nobody spoke the entire 40 miles. The facility looked like a cross between a daycare and a jail. Bright murals covered reinforced walls. Security cameras blinked in every corner. The receptionist checked us in with professional detachment, explaining the rules we already knew by heart. Frank was already there, waiting in room 3. Through the observation window, I saw him arranging coloring books and toys on a small table. He wore civilian clothes the prison had approved, trying to look like a normal father. Elena Elena froze when she saw him. Mom had to practically carry her to the door. The supervisor, a tired-looking woman with a clipboard, reminded us about the 2-hour duration. No early departure without documented emergency. I wasn't allowed in the room. Mom neither. We had to wait in the lobby where a camera showed a wide-angle view of the visit. The supervisor took Elena's hand and led her inside. The door closed with a decisive click. On the monitor, I watched Frank's face light up when Elena entered. He moved toward her, but the supervisor gestured for him to stay seated. Elena chose a chair as far from Frank as possible, pulling her knees to her chest. Frank started talking immediately, gesturing at the toys and books. Elena didn't move. He picked up a doll, making it dance across the table. Elena turned her face away. The supervisor made notes on her clipboard. After 20 minutes, Frank was crying. He kept reaching toward Elena, stopping just short of touching her. The supervisor had to remind him about physical contact rules twice. Elena hadn't said a single word or moved from her defensive position. Mom paced the lobby while I watched the monitor. Other families came and went, some looking happy, others as miserable as us. A woman recognized Mom from Frank's support group online, shooting us dirty looks. An hour in, Frank convinced Elena to color with him. She chose a page with flowers, filling them in with mechanical precision. Frank colored a butterfly, chatting constantly, though Elena never responded. The normalcy of it made my skin crawl. Then Frank made his move. While showing Elena his butterfly, he leaned in close, whispering something the supervisor couldn't hear. Elena went rigid. She dropped her crayon and started scratching at her arms, leaving red marks. The supervisor intervened, moving Frank back to his side of the table, but the damage was done. Elena was hyperventilating, rocking in her chair. The supervisor tried to calm her while Frank played innocent, claiming he'd only complimented her coloring. The remaining time crawled by. Elena shut down completely, staring at the wall while Frank alternated between crying and trying to engage her. The supervisor looked increasingly uncomfortable, but couldn't end the visit early without cause. Finally, the 2 hours ended. The supervisor brought Elena out, and she collapsed into Mom's arms. Frank pressed against the observation window, calling out though we couldn't hear him. His face twisted with rage when I led Elena away. In the car, Elena finally spoke. Frank had whispered that she'd always be his baby, that he'd make sure of it when he got out. The supervisor hadn't heard, and it wasn't technically a threat, just a promise that made Elena scratch her skin raw. Back home, Mom documented Elena's scratches and emotional state. Our lawyer said it might help modify future visits, but probably wouldn't cancel them. Frank had been too careful, too clever. The whisper would be his word against Elena's. That night, I found Elena in the bathroom with Mom's sewing scissors. She wasn't trying to hurt herself, just cutting her remaining hair even shorter. She wanted to look nothing like the baby Frank remembered. I helped her finish, understanding the desperate need for control. The next morning brought new harassment. Someone had posted photos of us entering the visitation facility on Frank's support page. Our faces were blurred, but people who knew us would recognize us. The comments called Mom a monster for keeping Frank from his daughter. Elena refused to eat for 3 days. Mom had to negotiate every sip of water, every bite of toast. The doctor prescribed anxiety medication, but Elena wouldn't take pills that might make her less alert. She needed to be ready for whatever came next. Frank's lawyer filed a report about the successful visit. They claimed Elena had colored with Frank, proof that their bond was repairing. The scratches were dismissed as nervous habits. They requested increased frequency, maybe twice monthly. I started sleeping on Elena's floor. She'd wake up screaming about Frank taking her away, about being forced back into baby clothes. I'd hold her until she stopped shaking, promising I'd never let him touch her again. Mom took leave from work to focus on Elena's care. Her boss was understanding but couldn't hold her position indefinitely. The bills kept coming while income stopped. Uncle Carlos covered our utilities, but pride prevented Mom from accepting more. 2 weeks later, we received notice that Frank's parole hearing had been moved up. Good behavior and program completion made him eligible sooner. He could be free in 3 months, with court-ordered access to Elena. The thought broke something in Mom. She called our lawyer, offering to sign away her parental rights if it would protect Elena, but that would only give Frank stronger claim. The system was designed to reunify families, not protect children from legal manipulation. Elena heard Mom's conversation and made her own decision. She started eating again, taking the anxiety medication, even doing her schoolwork, but it wasn't recovery. She was preparing for war, building strength for whatever came next. I helped her research self-defense techniques online. We practiced in the garage, learning pressure points and escape moves. The supervisor wouldn't let Frank grab her, but Elena needed to feel prepared. Control over her body was all she had left. Frank's next call was different. He spoke calmly about his upcoming parole, his plans to get an apartment near us, how he'd petition for unsupervised visits. He knew we were listening to every word, painting a picture of Elena's future that made her medication useless against the panic. Our lawyer filed motion after motion trying to restrict Frank's parole conditions. Each one cost money we didn't have. Mom sold everything valuable, even her wedding ring. The irony of funding Elena's protection with symbols of her marriage to Frank wasn't lost on anyone. The second visit arrived too quickly. Elena dressed in layers despite the heat, armor against Frank's gaze. She'd hidden safety pins in her pockets, small, sharp comforts. The drive felt shorter this time, dread making time compress. Frank had prepared better too. He'd styled his hair like he used to wear it, even found cologne similar to his old brand. He wanted to trigger Elena's earliest memories, the baby who'd loved her daddy before understanding what he was. This time, Elena didn't freeze. She walked to the chair herself, sat down, and stared directly at Frank. When he offered toys, she pushed them aside. When he tried to color, she took the crayons and broke them one by one. The supervisor warned Elena about destructive behavior. Frank played victim, crying about Elena's anger. But Elena kept breaking crayons methodically, maintaining eye contact. She was showing him she wasn't his baby anymore. Frank's mask slipped for just a moment. His face contorted with rage before resuming its sad father expression. But Elena had seen. She smiled, the first real expression in weeks. She'd found his weakness, his need for her to play along. The rest of the visit became a silent battle. Frank tried every manipulation, every trigger. Elena countered countered by being exactly what he didn't want, a strong, angry preteen who saw through him. The way Elena breaks each crayon while staring at Frank is really interesting. I wonder if she planned that or if it just came to her in the moment. The supervisor noted the tension, but couldn't intervene without cause. When Frank whispered again, Elena was ready. She repeated his words loudly, clearly, making sure the supervisor heard. Frank claimed she'd misunderstood, but doubt flickered in the supervisor's eyes. Elena had learned to fight within the system's rules. After that visit, something shifted. Elena still had nightmares, still struggled with anxiety, but she'd found power in resistance. She started eating better, doing schoolwork, even video chatting with her old friend who'd moved away. Mom saw the change too. She stopped crying constantly, started fighting smarter. We couldn't afford our lawyer anymore, but Mom learned to file motions herself. Uncle Carlos helped with legal research. We became our own advocates. Frank's parole hearing was set for next month. His supporters planned to pack the hearing room, but we had supporters too, family and friends who'd seen the truth. The battle lines were drawn for one final confrontation. Elena made a decision that shocked everyone. She wanted to speak at Frank's parole hearing, not in support, but to tell the board exactly what he'd done. Mom tried to protect her from that burden, but Elena insisted. It was her story to tell. We spent weeks preparing her statement. Elena wrote and rewrote, finding words for experiences that shouldn't need words. She practiced in front of the mirror, building courage with each repetition. The little girl was gone, replaced by a survivor. The parole hearing arrived on a cold Thursday. Elena wore the outfit she'd chosen carefully, jeans and a t-shirt that said, "Not your baby." Mom had tried to suggest something more formal, but Elena needed armor that felt like her. The hearing room was packed as expected. Frank's supporters filled half the space, holding photos of him with baby Elena. Our side had Uncle Carlos, family members, Elena's teacher, even some parents who'd learned the truth. The battle lines were clear. Frank appeared in person this time, shackled but looking reformed. He'd gained weight, looked healthy and stable. His lawyer presented certificates, testimonials, evidence of transformation. On paper, he was the perfect candidate for early release. Then Elena's turn came. She walked to the podium with steady steps. Her voice started soft but grew stronger with each word. She described the toddler bed, the baby clothes, the whispered threats. She pulled out the safety pins from her pocket, explaining why she needed sharp things to feel safe. Frank tried to interrupt, crying about misunderstandings, but Elena kept talking. She showed photos of her scratched arms, read entries from her journal, explained how he'd weaponized the system against her. The room fell silent except for her voice. When she finished, Frank made his final plea. He sobbed about rehabilitation, about just wanting to love his daughter. Some board members looked sympathetic. The decision would come within a week, determining everything. We went home and waited. Elena returned to school part-time, trying for normalcy. Mom went back to work. I caught up on missed assignments. We pretended life could continue either way, but we all knew better. The call came on Tuesday afternoon. Frank's parole was denied. The board cited Elena's testimony and concerns about his fixation. He'd serve at least 2 more years before another hearing. It wasn't permanent safety, but it was time. Frank's supporters erupted online, calling it injustice. Some threatened legal action, but without Frank directing them, their organization crumbled. The disgraced social worker disappeared. The harassment slowly faded. We'd won this battle, though the war wasn't over. Mom filed for divorce immediately, finally ready to sever that last connection. Frank fought it from prison, but without resources or support, he couldn't delay long. The papers were finalized within months, Mom taking back her maiden name. Elena started actual therapy with someone who understood trauma, not court-ordered sessions designed for reunification, but real help. She learned coping strategies, ways to reclaim her sense of self. The progress was slow but real. I graduated high school with Elena in the audience, cheering louder than anyone. College was starting soon, but I'd chosen a school nearby. Elena needed me, and I needed to see her continue healing. Family meant everything after what we'd survived. A year later, Elena performed in her school talent show. She sang the same song from her spring concert years ago, but with new strength. Her voice filled the auditorium, clear and confident. Mom and I cried, but they were different tears now. Frank sent letters sometimes, forwarded through lawyers. We never opened them. Elena decided she'd read them when she turned 18, if she wanted to. For now, they sat in a box in the closet, powerless to hurt her. The night after Elena's performance, we had a small celebration at home. Just family, the way she wanted it. As I watched her laugh with our cousins, I saw glimpses of who she might have been without Frank's shadow. But I also saw who she'd become, stronger than any of us. A survivor who refused to be anyone's baby. Mom pulled me aside during cake, thanking me for protecting Elena when she couldn't. But the truth was, Elena had saved herself. We'd just given her space to find that strength. And in the end, that was enough. Appreciate you letting me be the voice in your head for a bit. Hopefully not too annoying. Stay sharp out there. Subscribe for more content like this.